I invite you to go along with me as we look at the scripture this morning. It's taken from Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 9. You're certainly welcome to follow along. I encourage you to listen with your ears and your heart. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the possessions that they had gathered, and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and invoked the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on by stages toward Negem. God bless the reading and hearing of his holy word.
Thank you, Mel. On occasion, we give our lay readers readings with very complicated names, and you did very well. Thank you. Just a few weeks ago, our children learned this story about Abraham and Sarah during one of our nights at Vacation Bible Adventure, or VBA as we call it. Some churches call it Vacation Bible School, but we're more adventurous than that. Throughout the week, our kids made crafts, and they sang, and they danced, and they took on cool science experiments with Pastor Zigrid. They raced their way through very physical games. They watched Bible stories come to life with Oscar-worthy performances. And they snacked on very creative treats. The theme was on the go with God. So they explored 4 different Bible stories, one each night, about people traveling through life and faith and all the ways that God was with them on their journeys. Pastor Zigrid and I thought that it would be fun for the adults to explore the same stories. So our July sermon series is basically Vacation Bible Adventure for adults. There are no obstacle courses. You're welcome. But if you stick around throughout the month, you might just get a dramatic reading and a snack. Abraham and Sarah are still called Abram and Sarai in today's passage. God will soon change their names upon making a covenant with them. But for simplicity's sake today, I am going to call them Abraham and Sarah. And it is important to know that we meet them in Haran, which is now the area we know as southeastern Turkey. They were established there, probably wealthy with land and livestock. For God to call them away from the country and the family they knew meant massive disruption, not just for them, but for everyone they were leaving behind. Extended families lived communally, and everyone contributed to the common good, so their absence would be felt deeply. They came from a culture where people worshiped many gods, and until now, Abraham and Sarah likely did too. This moment marks the beginning of something brand new for them. For the first time, they are tuning in to a singular, living God who calls them personally with a promise and a purpose. They brought one family member, their nephew Lot, who has his own story, and it is a doozy, so we will save that for another Sunday. And, quote, the persons whom they had acquired. The author is likely referring to Abraham and Sarah's servants, people who were vital to their survival, but whose names we will never know. Yet another indication of the couple's relative wealth. And they traveled for approximately 600 miles. They traveled through hills and valleys and deserts. We can imagine that the farther they got from home, the heavier it struck them. They had just left so much behind, their family and their home. They also left behind beliefs, systems, and traditions they had been a part of, all to explore a new way of encountering the divine and the world. This was a courageous leap of faith, if ever there was one. Along the way, Abraham made altars for worship, as I shared with the children. Not altars to many gods, but just to the one who called him. It is an extraordinary testimony to how this journey transformed Abraham. Listen again to verse 7. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And then verse 8, from there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent. There he built an altar to the Lord and invoked the name of the Lord. Abraham created sacred spaces wherever God met him. And with these simple markers, he said, God was here. God spoke to me here. I will remember this place. Not every act of worship along one's path is going to be a physical altar. In fact, if we look throughout history, we can see how others have followed Abraham in building their altars for their unique contexts. Frederick Douglass, known as one of the most prominent Black social reformers in our nation's history, was born into slavery, as we well know. Growing up in Maryland, he started to learn how to read in secret with the help of a woman named Sophia Auld. She was the wife of the man who enslaved Douglass. Their reading material of choice, the Bible. Eventually, Hugh Auld, the enslaver, would come to find out about these secret tutoring sessions, and he became so angry that he forbade his wife and Douglass from continuing the lessons. In his first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, Frederick Douglass wrote about how Auld's reaction ignited something within himself, saying, "From that moment, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. The argument which he so warmly urged against my learning to read only served to inspire me with a desire and determination to learn." Was it simply Douglass's literacy that was threatening to Auld? Or was it the fact that Douglass was reading the Bible, a library of books that cry out for freedom from oppression? More determined than ever, Douglass continued reading, and the Bible remained a primary resource for him. And language, especially sacred language, became his holy ground. After his daring escape from slavery at 20 years old, Douglass kept reading. And then he began writing. Next, he founded newspapers. And he became a gifted speaker, and he authored entire books. And eventually, Frederick Douglass became a licensed preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. With each of the steps on his journey, Frederick Douglass grew spiritually, moving forward to each new place that God called him. Every passage he learned to read, every word that he wrote, every testimony he delivered was about advocating for freedom and glorifying God. Each word, spoken and written, became a kind of altar. God was here. God spoke to me here. I will remember this place. Frederick Douglass's decision to speak out after he escaped was bold. He could have remained quiet and settled into a life of relative comfort, but he gave that up to share the gospel and advocate for freedom for all. It was a risky move. Like Abraham, Douglass also had to release old beliefs, rejecting the lies of slavery that sought to convince him he was unworthy of freedom or dignity or purpose. On this Independence Day weekend, we have an opportunity to reflect upon where we are as a nation and also as Christians. What must we release in order to go with God? Where is God calling us? And what altars will we build along the way? Now, our nation's founders left behind the familiar structures of monarchy and class systems, carrying only their ideals for a new nation. Of course, they were imperfect people who did not extend their vision of freedom to all. And now, 250 years later, we still have not realized the true ideals of liberty for all here in this nation. Many remained burdened by poverty or lack of access to adequate health care and education. As people of faith, we must listen as God continues to call us forward, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of our neighbors who deserve better. In a recent edition of the United Church of Christ Daily Devotional, Reverend Matt Laney wrote, in part, "Jesus never told us to make nations great. He told us to love our enemies, welcome the stranger, lay down power. For Christ followers, patriotism is never a higher calling than mercy and peacemaking. National loyalty is never a substitute for gospel justice." Reverend Laney goes on to write, "What do we do when an empire baptizes bigotry and calls it righteousness? We do what Jesus did. We flip tables. We tell inconvenient truths. We feed the hungry, shelter the refugee, vote for the vulnerable, and pray with our feet." After I read this, I realized everywhere we pause on our journeys, because God told us to feed someone in that place, we build an altar. Every moment we hear God tell us to house a refugee and we divert our plans to do so, we build an altar. Every place we stop because God has called us to tend to the sick, we build an altar. Every time we advocate for the needs of the marginalized because that is what Jesus did and we are called to follow him, we build an altar. This is how we worship God. These become our tangible marks on our journey that signify God was here. God spoke to me here. I will remember this place. Even better than living up to our founders' ideals will be when we live up to God's ideals, embodying the love, justice, mercy, and radical welcome that Jesus taught. This week, as some of us are grappling with what the budget passed by our government might mean for the most vulnerable among us, our call to build altars of compassion has become even more urgent. And the devastating floods in Texas's Hill Country this weekend, which have claimed dozens of lives, call us to build altars of rescue and relief, worshiping God by serving God's children in their deepest need. God is calling us into the world. What do we have to leave behind when we go? What does traveling light look like for us today? Some are giving up Christian nationalism, recognizing that true faith cannot be confined to or defined by a political ideology. For some, traveling light means that, like Abraham, we stop serving false gods, the gods of wealth, status, and power, and instead put our full faith in the one true God who is faithful to us in return and calls us by name. And traveling light might start by letting go of what we have always thought it meant to be the church, because the world needs a bolder church right now. God is calling upon us to respond courageously to the wounds of the world, and it means we cannot do it while sitting right here. Here's the good news that we shared with our children at VBA, and it is good news for grown-ups too. God is with us. Just as God was with Abraham and Sarah on their journey through unknown territory, and just as God was with Frederick Douglass on his path to freedom, God is with us as we navigate the changing landscapes of faith and culture. And isn't that liberating? Every altar we build, each act of service, moment of just compassion, gesture of radical welcome, marks not just where God met us, but how God is transforming us. So here we are, fellow travelers, at a crossroads. The world doesn't need more comfortable Christians. It needs more faithful ones. God is calling us. The journey awaits. Leave your baggage at home. Let's go build some altars. Amen.